Startups are not the place for on-the-job training. You don't hire green and inexperienced people because we need people who have been doing this for a long time to come in. Our clients aren't paying us to experiment. They're paying us to execute. We don't have time and we don't have cash.
Welcome to SaaS That App, Building B2B Web Applications, the podcast where we share real-world stories, practical advice, and tech insights for those building or thinking about starting a tech-enabled business. I'm your co-host, Aaron Marchbanks.
And I'm Justin Edwards. Each week we bring you the stories, strategies, and insights you need to build your SaaS or tech-enabled business smarter, not harder. Let's dive right in.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to SaaS That App. Hope everybody is having a terrific day, as I know Justin is now having less of one because he had to turn his air conditioning off. How's it going, Justin?
Hey, I'm doing well. The air conditioning is off, and you're not going to believe this, but I had to put on a jacket. I traveled to this place called Cincinnati over the weekend, and I don't know if you know this, but they have winter there. So it gets really cold at one part during the year. I had no idea. It's so strange. But I took the jacket off and put it back in the closet. I'm back in shorts. The AC's off for now, but we're good. How are you doing?
I'm doing better today, actually, because we had a gorgeous, finally spring, actual spring day, not like full spring or second spring that falls in between second and third winter. But it was beautiful today. So I had a very lovely run this morning and am very happy with the weather, and I will take it all the year round.
Perfect.
Also joining us today, as you might see on the big screen here, we are excited to welcome Anthony Nitsos, who is founder and the lead guru at SaaS Gurus, where he helps post-revenue SaaS startups build stronger financial systems and scale with confidence. Anthony has spent decades working at the intersection of finance, operations, and technology, including leadership roles at companies like Duo Security, LlamaSoft. Both of those grew rapidly and were ultimately acquired for multi-billion-dollar exits. Through SaaS Gurus, though, Anthony has developed the FinCore methodology, helping SaaS founders transform finance from a reporting function into a strategic system that supports growth, improves valuations, reduces anxiety, and all of that good stuff. He also is at the forefront of being a fractional CTO. So we're going to get into all of that today. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be on. And yes, I'm in Ann Arbor. It's cold.
Still, yes, it hasn't crept quite into spring there. Yeah, we just broke free of the cold.
Although, hey, the Wolverines are in the Sweet 16, so we'll see. Actually, both the men and the women's basketball teams are in the Sweet 16, so.
Yes, congrats on that. We did not survive the first round, unfortunately, but, we made a trip this year, so I'll take it.
That's all right.
So, Anthony, always the hardest question, and the first one right out of the chute is you did not start where you have finished. So how did you get your beginnings here, and how did you wind up where you're at?
You're right. I started off in human medicine, of all things. Michael Crichton of Jurassic Park fame and I are both medical school dropouts, although he made a lot more money, I think, selling books and doing movies, and I certainly am doing this stuff. How I ended up here is a long and circuitous path that goes through many different branches, but, what do you do when you're a medical school dropout? Well, you're in Michigan, you were in medicine, and there's manufacturing, so I guess because they all started with M, I ended up in manufacturing, which, I'm making a joke out of it, but the parallels between a manufacturing organization and the human body and its systems interconnectability are legion. There are many. And so I was able to take a lot of the training that I got in medical school and turn that into basically process reengineering and manufacturing optimization. And so I spent a number of years doing that. And then I decided, I'm tired of working in factories. It's fun. Don't get me wrong. It's kind of cool to wake up at 4:00 in the morning and deal with some jerk on the forklift. That just makes my day. But anyway, long and short, in the meantime, I was also getting some accounting chops because my dad, God rest his soul, has said, if nothing else, be a professional. They always have work. And since I didn't want to be a doctor, I figured, being an accountant, that's a profession. I should be able to find some work. Besides, there's a lot of stuff that's going on in the accounting side of this company that I don't understand that would be really helpful. So with that combined accounting knowledge and manufacturing knowledge, the ERP implementers found me. So this is back before Y2K when everybody and their brother and sister was trying to figure out whether their code was going to blow up. And as one of the paths they would take is to go out buy, SAP or JD Edwards or Bond or any of the other ERP systems that existed back then. And they were desperate for people that understood manufacturing and accounting. And I did both. So that's what I did for a number of years was, IT ERP implementations. And that's really where the true systems integration came into play was you've got to deal with manufacturing, you got to deal with engineering, you got to deal with finance, you got to deal with procurement, you got to deal with HR, you got to deal with accounting, you got to deal with all these in one single database. How do you do that and get them all to talk to each other without pulling the knives out? And that's where the ERP implementers really, made their money, and their worth was like figuring out, okay, how do we really take what were used to be these siloed systems and bring them all into one? But then 2000 comes along. And about a year before the year 2000 comes along, the sales in the ERP market start doing this. And they did that because back then you had to spend millions of dollars with on-premise hardware. You had to have teams of people on-premise working on these things. It was a long lead time to get these systems up and running. It's not like NetSuite and Intact today where you can get them up and running very quickly. Back then it was like months to years to get these systems. And so the sales were falling off, the projects were falling off. You were either had your ERP or you were screwed, or you figured out how to fix your own system. So this is one of my first learning experiences is 2 days before Thanksgiving in the year, 2000, I get a phone call that my services would no longer be required after the end of the year. And I'm like, you couldn't have waited until after Christmas to tell me that. You had to fire me before Thanksgiving. It's like you large corporation, typical jerks. And by the way, I warned them. I said, this was coming. You should get us all retrained in supply chain optimization software, which was becoming a big thing back then. Speaking of LlamaSoft. And they just ignored it. So they let an entire practice with probably, 2 or 3 centuries worth of implementation experience just poof in the wind. I never understood large corporations. It also informed me that I didn't really want to work for large corporations anymore because in some cases they have such blinders on, like if you're not right in this channel.
Yeah, you are not alone in that.
Yeah. So after that, I became my very first accounting job, actual accounting job. I got hired in as the controller of a Japanese subsidiary in Michigan. One of my other trips, had been to Japan. I actually spoke the language. I knew somewhat of the culture. And so with my ERP chops and my accounting chops and some Japanese in the background, they said, okay, we're going to make you controller of this company. And this was my first scale. We had started off at 5 million in revenue and ended up at 50 million in 3 years. And they needed somebody to come in and build all the systems, the financial core that was going to be needed to build that scale. And back then, a lot of it was still on-premise hardware and software. But they pretty much said, we're going to move from this building to this building. It's brand new, wide open, complete 4-building, greenfield implementation. You're in control of everything information-wise. Make it work. I'm like, right? I get to design from greenfield my own IT system for all the accounting and finance. It was great. I had free reign. We got everything done so it was automated. We had barcode readers on just about everything. All the data was feeding into the system. And by year 3, I had nothing to do. I was
the best.
bored out of my beep in mind, right? I don't want to say it out loud. I know you guys can edit it. But we got to the point, I'm not lying, literally, we got to the point where that big growth spurt was happening all in 1 year because long-term contracts in automotive is how it works. So you're going to be scaling, but then it's all hits at once. Everybody else was running around with their hair on fire, blood on the floor, people quitting left, right, and center because the volume was scaling so fast. The accounting and finance team, we're all sitting there watching it. We're like, we're done. Yeah, we got everything running. It's like, we're all like, oh, you need some help with that? I was out there helping packing crates at one point because it was like nothing else for me to do. I might as well pitch in, right? And besides, you worked in manufacturing before, so it's not like I don't know how to run a forklift. I still had my forklift license, right? So like, hey, I'm out there. It's like, what's the controller doing on the shop floor? He's like, working.
That's fantastic.
Helping it work. But, when things settled down, I was bored out of my mind. I really was. I mean, I could still be there at that job, I'm sure, drawing a nice salary to do nothing but read the Wall Street Journal and walk out and break things so I'd have something to fix. But being who I am, I got to that point and I maxed it and I said, you know what? It's time for me to do something else. And I can't go completely in a brand new field, right? I need to do something adjacent. And so I started looking at finance. And, for any of your listeners out there, finance is not accounting. Accounting is not finance. They are not the same thing. Accounting is rearward looking. It looks at history. It accounts for and measures what has happened. Finance, by its nature, is predictive. It's looking to the future to say, here's what's going to happen. And it's also really involved in structuring of corporations and financing and, the money coming in to fund all this stuff. So I was looking at that and I said, these finance guys are making a lot of money doing that. I know how to do accounting and ERP and manufacturing and all that. I bet I could do finance. So I rented my house, got my cat fixed up so that he could come with me to the UK, and I landed in Scotland at the University of St. Andrews to pick up a master's degree in finance. A couple of reasons for that. One, it's fast. You can get a master's degree in 1 year. And it's a really great college. By the way, Adam Smith, you remember Adam Smith? He's the guy that wrote The Wealth of Nations, kind of invented economics. His house is like 2 train steps down from St. Andrews. So the Scots really know finance, and it was a great program.
Was it hard getting a degree in a foreign language?
Yo, you're right. Your listeners didn't hear the earlier conversation we were having about people who speak Scottish. Yeah, and by the way, don't ever say Scotland's part of England. They will not find your body.
Oh, okay?
Yeah,
no.
Oh, no. I know that much.
The Scots are the Scots, right? And they pride themselves on the fact that they have never been successfully conquered. And people are like, well, Great Britain conquered them. I said, no. Actually, that would be King James, who became King James the First and the Fifth or whatever, who actually was the King of Scotland, who became the King of England. So no, technically, Scotland has never been. Anyway, I digress. I learned that in Scotland, by the way.
I'll bet you did.
Yeah, I bet I did, right? Hence where the King James Bible came from. It's that
entry
king.
exam, yeah.
Real quick, this episode is brought to you by Delta Systems, which is what Aaron and I do when we're not talking through microphones to you, the people of the internet. We've got a really, really great software team here, and we love to work with cool people on cool projects. So if that sounds like you and you've got a problem or you're in some kind of a jam, go to deltasystems.com, grab a time with us. We can beat up on your problem together, and if there's a fit there, amazing, we'll help you out. So deltasystems.com, grab an appointment, and hey, maybe we can work together.
Anyway, so I finished Scotland, came back to the United States, and that's when the fractional career really began. So I partnered up with a guy who already had a practice going, and we hit the ground running with fractional work and you name it. Yoga studios, lawn care services, small manufacturing companies, it didn't matter. And I was in my element because I loved doing that kind of work. I got to see all these different corporations and companies and deal with all these CEOs. And then in 2007, we got our first SaaS client. And this was before anybody knew what SaaS meant. I didn't even know what the term was. It's like, what's SaaS, right? This whole idea of a subscription for software and prepaid services and all that, and having to reorient our models in terms of how we account for this and how we plan working capital for it, that all started back in 2007. And so fast forward to about 2015, I was recruited by Duo Security to come in and work for their CFO to basically run the entire back office shop for him so he could focus on strategic stuff. And that was the first unicorn that I worked on. And then right around when that exit happened, I moved over to Llamasoft, worked for their CFO, basically doing the same thing. And then in 2020, when literally I had COVID, and COVID was, I didn't know it, I had it at the time, and COVID was starting, that's when I founded SaaS Gurus, where we do nothing but focus on SaaS companies, fractional CFO work on down to the HR benefits and admin, payroll, bookkeeping, and every stop in between. So there is the long, sad story of how I ended up from medicine to becoming the doctor of dollars for multiple SaaS startups.
That's fantastic.
I should write a book on that.
You should.
You should. That's amazing.
I had people calling me all the time saying, we want you to write a book. And I'm like, why do I need a book, right? Is that something people do now?
Yeah, it's a huge ego piece. You could be an author too.
Yeah, my ego's big enough. I don't need anything more.
Well, I guess tell me a little bit more specific about kind of your work with SaaS Gurus and like who you engage with. What do you like to do for your clients and like, how's that go?
Absolutely. Our clients are actually pre-revenue. We don't engage just with post-revenue. We do a lot of pre-revenue work. So pre-revenue, usually up to about the B round of investment when they have the money to afford a full-time CFO. That's our sweet spot. We deal directly with the CEOs and founders, or at least I do. I have an entire team of people that I do the strategic finance work. I spend a lot of my time on cash forecasting. That's probably 80% of my time specifically is spent as the chief financial officer. It should be called cash flow oracle is what that really should stand for. Forecasting cash balances, because if you're a bootstrapper, you need to know how much working capital you're going to have available to reinvest back into the business and pay yourself. And if you're venture backed, you need to know how long your runway is so that you know when you need to go for the next round of investment, or where your break even point is so that you can say, hey, we don't need any outsiders anymore. We can fly this plane on its own. So that's the level of work that I do. Then I have an entire team that handles everything from the FP&A, financial planning and analysis, the controller work, the bookkeeping, the HR, the payroll, all that stuff. So we're really a back office team with the CFO at the head and everything else supporting that.
I want to kind of taper that and also simultaneously back up to something that you had said, which I really liked, that, accounting being rear looking and finance being predictive. And that aligns very much with other things that I have read about you and from you about transforming finance kind of into more like a strategic asset instead of just a reporting utility or reporting function. So I'm curious, what does that actually look like inside of a growing SaaS company?
So what that looks like is, typical example, client we're onboarding right now, the first thing we need to do is fix their current systems. And by fix their current systems, that means if you're a SaaS company, you need to know about 5 key things. You need to know, obviously, what your sales growth is. You need to know what your net revenue is, like your churn, your contraction, your expansion. Those are 2 really critical top-line measures. Below that, you need to know what your gross margin is. That's a hugely important number for a SaaS company. And being able to classify that correctly, that comes from your accounting system, right? Some people does that belong in cost of goods sold or not? Those kinds of questions that people who did not grow up to be accountants, which I didn't. I do have a CPA. I'm Anthony. I'm a recovering CPA, is what I like to say. I do have that CPA. I also have a CMA, and I also, I'm a CFO. So I've got all the C's necessary for money and a few degrees to go along with it. But that being able to understand what your CAC is, your cost to acquire a customer, that means that your accounting system has to report those marketing and sales dollars correctly and other things that go along with it. So it's kind of like if you've ever done yoga or a martial art, having a really strong core is key to success in that. Same thing for your finance system. Your accounting system has to show financial reports that are SaaS compliant, so that you can benchmark yourself, so that you have the illumination on what's going on to say, oh, we're spending way too much money to acquire customers. We didn't know that. Or our gross margin really sucks. We need to improve our hosting costs, or we need to cut down on the OpenAI bill or whatever it happens to be in order to get, the gross margin back up, or we need to raise prices, right? So what fixing that finance core does is illuminate. That's the biggest thing that it does, is it shows suddenly a light on every aspect of the organization as a SaaS company that you as a CEO need to pay attention to and say, oh, we have a problem here. We didn't know about that. Or we're doing great at that. Let's do more of that, right? It can be both sides. But after that first initial cleanup of the accounting system, usually the meeting is, wow, I didn't know that, is a very common answer. It's like, oh, I really didn't know that. From there, we build all of the SaaS metrics that come out of it, the ones I was just talking about before. But more important to me is that gives us the basis for the forecasting tool. I need a good, strong history to know what has been going on and conversations with the executive team to know what's going to happen, and marry those 2 together to come up with that forecast. And we call it the financial model. And the financial model does 2 things for us. It shows us what our P&L is going to look like out to whatever time frame is, and it shows us what our cash balances at the end of each month are going to be. And so that is like you're flying an airplane without any instruments in the clouds, and you're hoping that you're above the ground. You think you're doing fine. You don't know exactly how fast you're going, but you're in the air. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to give you an instrument panel, and we're going to give you the radar, and we're going to give you all the pieces that you need to know in order to know how the plane is flying and operating, but more important, where you're headed and whether you're high enough off the ground to stay out of trouble. And that high enough off the ground to stay out of trouble is called your cash balance, because, baby, you can't spend net income. You can only spend cash. That came from one of my professors way back when. And I embrace that fully. It's like, okay, if you're a SaaS company and you're getting prepaid for all your subscriptions, that's your cash flow coming in. That's different from how you recognize it for income, right? That's the GAAP revenue thing. But those 2 are not the same thing. And I can't tell you how many clients have come back to me and said, man, I'm glad that we forecast cash separately from the income statement, because you're right, the 2 are not necessarily the same thing. And I said, no, they never are. There's always this timing difference. So financial Statements, those are great. Those are useful. That's accounting. That's financial reporting. But marrying that up to a forecast that actually works and shows your cash balances going forward, that's what you need to run your company. I don't care what business you're in. It doesn't matter if it's software or retail or manufacturing or services. It doesn't matter. You need to know where your cash is heading because you want to stay out of trouble.
So you mentioned that you work with folks that are pre-revenue as well as getting pretty big to where they can actually bring on a finance person full-time. What advice do you give to folks that are pre-revenue or maybe have one or two customers, aren't really sure if they have product market fit? I mean, you can calculate these numbers, but in the situation where you don't have a lot of data, it's kind of like maybe they're not so useful or there's not a lot of signal there. Like, how do you coach folks in that position?
So actually, the go-to-market strategy and tactics are the most common failure points when it comes to startups, right? Now, there's kind of two different groups of founders that I think address this in different manners. There's the bootstrappers. The bootstrappers tend to be industry insiders. As a matter of fact, tend to be. They are. They're industry insiders who say, I see a need for a product. I work in this market. I know the players. I know how the market works. I know the sales cycle. I know all that stuff because, maybe they're an account executive or an executive of some kind, but they know the industry from the inside. And they say, you know what? It would be great if we had a product that did this. And so they go out and they hire a dev team or whatever, or they find a friend who's willing to do it on speculation and equity, but they come up with a product and then they already know what their go-to-market is because they're in the market. That tends to be the bootstrap group. The VC-backed group tends to be engineering types or inventor types who've come up with a really cool AI solution or software solution says, I bet people will buy this, right? Difference, right? I know people will buy this. That's your insider bootstrappers. To, I bet people will buy this. That's kind of your VC backed. And they convince VCs to invest in them. Say, yeah, I bet there's a market for that too. And so you develop a prototype, you get a little bit of sales, you find out there is some product market fit. But then you got to get to the phase where it's like, okay, is there really a product market fit? And more important, does it stick, right? When I sell it, do they keep it? And so that transition point from like the pre-revenue to what I call prototype revenue to proof of concept to actual traction, that kind of progression, that's where the VC market really plays its high risk, right? Because they're trying to figure that out. I can't tell you what your product market fit is. I can't tell you what your go-to-market is because I'm on the finance side of things. I'm not the product person. I can look at it and say, hey, that's cool, right? I bet there's a market for that too. But who your ICP is, who the avatars are within the ICP, where their watering holes are, where you can get to them, what messaging you need to create in order to get their attention, and then what that close cycle looks like. I can't tell you what that is. I can describe like I just did what those steps are and what you need to be paying attention to. But I can't tell you, hey, you know what? You're basically account-based marketing. That's how you should be doing your selling as opposed to advertise-driven, as opposed to product-led. That's all up to really the inventors and the CEOs to figure out. I'm there to tell them if they're effective. That's really what it comes down to. I'm the guy with the whistle and the stripy shirt on the field, making sure that the score is being kept and the players are all playing the game correctly. And that's also a big role of what CFOs do, is we also make sure you're following the rules. Because when you go out for an investment, this is something people don't always pay attention to. When you go out for an investment, you're going to sign an agreement that has something in it that's called reps and warranties. Representations and warranties. And what it says is you're legally binding yourself to say, yes, we have filed our taxes. Yes, we do file the sales tax rules. Yes, we are registered in all the states we're supposed to be registered in. Yes, we do have proper insurance. In other words, yes, we are playing the game according to the rules. If you haven't been, that can be grounds for either lawsuit or shareholder lawsuit, or your reputation is ruined and you're not going to get any more funding. So you do want to play the game by the rules, and having somebody who understands those rules is an important player on your team, irrespective of all the finance and other stuff that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to play the game by the rules, whether you agree with them or not. That's the game that we play. So
you've listed a few, but you're advising whether it's pre or post. I'm just curious, like, what are some of the most common financial blind spots that founders have once their product starts gaining traction and they think, hey, I do need somebody to come into this role and find out where we actually are and build our instrument panel and things like that. You talked about how they're like, oh, I didn't know that. But I'm just curious, like, what are those big glaring blind spots more often than not?
Usually it comes down to exactly what I was talking about, which is the CPA set up the chart of accounts. God love tax CPAs, but they do not know how to set up a chart of accounts for the life of me. I've never seen one. It makes sense for taxes, I guess, but taxes don't make any more sense to me than voodoo does. Sorry, tax CPAs out there. They're like, oh, yeah, okay, great. I'm glad I have a tax CPA and a doctor and a lawyer, but I don't want to be any one of them. But it's like you'll come into a chart of accounts and you'll see wages in one line, right? You won't see customer support broken out. You won't see salespeople broken out. You won't see marketing people broken out. You won't see the engineers broken out. You see wages. Like right there, as soon as I see that, I can tell you in 10 seconds whether your chart of accounts is worth anything or not, because I'm going to focus on that. The problems that they run into is what I talked about earlier, illumination and visibility. They really don't know how their company's performing. They know how their company's performing on an aggregate basis. Like we're selling, we're getting cash in. I have more money at the bank account in the end of the month than I did in the beginning. I'm doing fine. But they don't know why, right? They don't necessarily know why. And that's the danger zone. You can be very successful. You can be highly successful. You got cash coming in all the place and you say, what do I need a CFO for? But if you really want to know how to optimize it, and you really want to know where your hot spots are, either, good hot spots or bad hot spots, you need somebody who can go pull all those numbers apart for you and put them back together in a way that makes sense to say, oh, yeah, you're doing great, but you know what? You're losing customers just as fast as you're getting them, right? Big churn problem. Or, yeah, you're getting customers, but your sales team is completely ineffective. You're doing it all. Right. So it's, it could be stuff that they're very well aware of on a gut level basis, but, gut is opinion, data are facts. And that's a big difference between I play with data and facts. I don't play with opinion. I'm going to show you exactly what's going on with the numbers. And then you make the decisions that you need to make in order to, change the company or change course, but you'll be making them based on facts, not opinion. So that's really what, the role of the CFO is to say, here's what's really going on and why, and here's where it's going to go if you don't change course, which could be good or bad. But it is really the role of an illuminator more than we're like a strategic enabler, if you will. We're really helping the executive team enable the executive team to make decisions based on information. So you can get to a pretty successful point without it, but I don't see how you can grow beyond that without having, the right numbers at the right time. Especially, by the way, if you're going to go in front of investors, you're going to need this information. You're going to need it. If you'd bootstrapped yourself, maybe you don't, hey, I'm making $1 million a month. What do I care? Okay, you're right. What do you care? Right. But when you start making $800K a month and then $400K a month and you didn't know why, because you don't have the right financial information, that's the risk you run.
For sure. Knowing your numbers if you're a SaaS operator is absolutely key. And and it was also just predicting plateaus you can do ahead of time with proper forecasting and analysis. And people less smart than me have said it's a lot easier to predict your plateau and solve the problem before you reach it than it is to reach it and then break through it. So as someone who has not done a lot of forecasting or those kinds of financial work on companies that I have been involved with or worked with, I'm soaking this all in. I'm very happy that you're sharing your wisdom with us. And I'm like, I need to go back and revisit my chart of accounts and figure out what I'm doing.
I haven't met a chart of accounts yet that I liked other than my own. Well, and it's not just mine. Actually, I've done 2 IPO preps. And these are basically SEC standard type of financial statements. I think about like the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, right? If there had been somebody paying attention like we do now with our telescopes looking out, looking for those things, I'd rather find that asteroid when it's at the orbit of Pluto than in the orbit of the moon. I can do something when it's way out there, right? Flip that around. That's what your financial system can do. It can give you that visibility to avoid, you said, that plateau or find that deflection point where you can put in the minimal amount of work to change course so that you don't end up with an extinction level event.
You're kind of in the role of a consultant in heaven for a long time. And I'm kind of in the role of a consultant in heaven for a long time. Do you have any jaded consultant stories about someone not following your advice or just an early morning black coffee kind of complaint story?
Gosh, I don't know. Where do I start, right?
Don't we all?
Here's a good one. Hire slow, fire fast, especially when it comes to your sales team, right? There are a lot of people out there that claim to be a great salesman, right? Or saleswoman, salesperson, I should say. And in the end, you need somebody who can effectively, prospect, close deals, and turn that into revenue. And the longer you have them on the payroll that they're not performing, the more cash it's draining from your company. I can't tell you how many times I have seen CEOs hire salespeople that couldn't close a door, let alone a deal. And it's like, why didn't you fire this person 6 months ago, right? So especially when it comes to the sales team, you need to be very careful. First of all, do not hire anybody in the fourth quarter, because if they're coming to you in the fourth quarter, that already tells me that they haven't met their quota from their first company. Otherwise, they'd be sticking around to collect their year-end kicker, right? Don't hire people and salespeople in the fourth quarter. They're probably not the salespeople that you want, or you're going to have to pay a lot of money to pay them off in order to move them. But in the sales team in particular, that's just crucial. Your marketing team is the other one that you need to be very careful about hires and making sure that they're not coming in to experiment with you. They're coming in to execute. You, especially as a startup, when your working cash is so precious and you got that $2 million or $5 million round from the investors and you got to make it work, blowing it on marketing teams that don't know what they're doing, that haven't done it before, that don't know your industry. Pay for the people that have the experience in your industry. You're going to say, wow, that's a lot of money for somebody. I say, yeah, but what's the cost of failure, right? You invest in the right people. Startups are not the place for on-the-job training. They're not, right? You don't hire green people. You don't hire green and inexperienced people out there if you're listening. Startups are not the environment for you, because we need people who have been doing this for a long time to come in. And as I tell my team, our clients aren't paying us to experiment. They're paying us to execute. We're coming in and saying, this is how you do it, not, gee, let me figure out how to do that. No, that's not how that works. We don't have time and we don't have cash. A little bit different when it's a bigger company and you can afford to bring somebody in. You reach that 200, 300 employee threshold where now you have some slack in the team. You've got some extra capacity where you can bring people on and train them. That's different. But when you're 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 people, you don't have time for that. So those are some, I can't give specifics, but war stories of, gee, I hired X, and it's like, do they actually know how to do this? And then 6 months later, they're still trying to figure it out. And meanwhile, you've wasted all of your money on their salary and their benefits and opportunity cost, right? Because you've lost time.
Primarily, yeah.
I mean, time is a relentless beast, right? You're given X amount of money, you have Y amount of time to achieve results with it. That Y amount of time doesn't change. You got to figure it out. The finance and the area that I deal with, that expertise also is not out there, whereas you would think like not all fractional CFOs are the same. If you're working in SaaS, you want a SaaS experienced fractional CFO. Why? Because we know how to put your numbers together to make you look good for your investors, or put your numbers together to say you're not ready to go out for investment because, prime example, we come into a client, they're a startup, they're bootstrapped, their revenue looks like it's growing great. It is, but then we find out they have a 50% churn rate. Ruh-roh, right? I love Scooby-Doo. Ruh-roh. You got to fix that or you're not going to be investable. And that's exactly the problem they ran into, is they wanted to go for investment, but the investors took a look at those churn numbers and they're like, you haven't figured out how to keep the customers that you have. You're too high risk. So in the early, you talked about how do you figure that go-to-market out or that sales part early on. One of the things is, don't just sell to somebody because they frost the glass, right? Oh, they're a customer. Let's sign them up, right? But if they're a customer and you sign them up and they're not in your ideal company profile, the likelihood of their churn is very high. And that's going to come back and bite you in the backside. And that's what this company did, was they were just selling to everybody left, right, and center. Now, to their credit, they had a product that was brand new. There was no known market for it, so they didn't know exactly who their ICP was. They didn't know exactly what the product market fit. They just knew that it was really interesting and cool, and a lot of people were buying it. But then the companies that didn't really fit, they ended up churning quickly or simply trying to get out of their contracts, and that created this problem. So you want to be careful in your early stages that you're not just selling to anybody just because you want the sale. I get that. You need cash. But there's a downstream impact to that if you're not careful on who you're bringing in the door in the first place. So having that sales book figured out, and that sales book tells you how to properly qualify a client before you actually sign a contract with them, that's an important piece of your growth strategy.
Yeah, and I would argue that that's true anytime. I mean, it's certainly, especially at the startup level, but anytime along the way. I mean, Justin and I have talked people out of doing business with us just because it wasn't a good fit, or it wasn't the right fit, or we weren't what they were looking for, or we weren't going to get them what it is they actually needed, or we could see far enough down the road to recognize that this was going to be a particularly challenging client for X reasons. So just being able to qualify that even decades into a business, I think is still of importance.
Yeah, it is. It never changes. I'm just saying it's that asteroid analogy in the very early days. That's where it can hurt you really badly. It'll hurt you no matter what. But, that's where I go back to my ERP days, which is having an information technology infrastructure that delivers information to people. And that data is useless, right? I need it processed and turned into information. I need that data to be accurate because that's my input to my information. But the information that comes out of it, that's what I use to make decisions. That has to be timely. It has to be accurate. And without that, you're flying a plane without any instruments. I better hope you're above the ground.
Well, it's Q1 of 2026, so I have to ask you, unfortunately, how is AI impacting what you do, and how's your team engaging with it, if at all?
Thank you for asking that. I've never had anybody ask me that recently. Every single client that we have signed up in the last 2 years is an AI solution. That's number one. We are experiencing a tremendous amount of growth simply from all the SaaS AI that's out there. I myself am using AI tools every day to improve my productivity. I use ChatGPT, Perplexity, you name it. They're all becoming more commoditized, but I have an amazing dictation tool that in and of itself cut 10 to 15% of my time during the day that I was wasting on typing. All I have to do is hit a button and it does a really good job, right? It's not like the old days where it's like you had to constantly correct it. Accounting, Whisperflow, you know it. Hey, plug Whisperflow, baby. I just paid for my premium subscription, $145 well spent. Considering how many hours a day that it saves me, that's time that is more value added to my clients. I can turn around and give value to them and myself.
And if you are a technical Linux user and you want something similar that you don't have to pay for, there's OpenWhisper, and a little bit of technical know-how, you can get it up to running locally. It's an incredibly powerful tool. And on top of that, if you also want to run your models locally, you can avoid sending all of your data off to the cloud if you're a privacy-minded person. So just to plug that for our technical folks.
There you go. I have no idea what you just said, but it sounded good. And accounting is, frankly, one of those areas like lower level programming that is going to disappear because of AI, because having an AI tool plug transactions into accounts, once it's learned how to do them, that basically your bookkeeping function goes away. So we really heavily rely on rules-based entry of data because the data entry piece, it has to be correct. But once it's there, it's really the fun starts, interpreting the data. So we as a team are using it. I'm actively always looking for more AI tools to increase our productivity for a number of reasons. It allows us to be, more clients, right? More time with our clients, less time with administrivia and rote type of stuff. And then, of course, on the flip side, all of our customers coming to us nowadays, that's like, hey, I have an AI solution that does this. And it's like, that is so cool for me. I'm a science fiction fanatic from like day one. I think I came out of my mother with a book, science fiction book on it, right? I love living what I used to read with science fiction, right? This to me is like the best time of my life. It's like, wow, I used to read about this stuff when I was a kid was going to come and it's here.
Finally, yes.
Finally, right? I have my Star Trek communicator, right?
Yes. And tricorder and yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm waiting for the tricorder. So when this thing actually has, ultrasound and infrared and diagnostics on it, where I can then be McCoy, and then maybe I'll go back to medical school.
It's not on there as native yet, but they do have them. You just have to carry the little extra scanner. I'm a huge Star Trek fan myself. I get it.
Star Trek, thank you, not wars.
Yeah, for a number of reasons. I do enjoy a good Star Wars story, but Star Trek is where my heart's at.
Absolutely.
I have a friend who's not a nerd, really, but he did have a podcast about Star Trek for a while. And yeah, he has an interesting take on this, which is that Star Wars is actually a fantasy story set in space. And Star Trek is a science fiction show. So he's basically like, Star Wars is just fantasy.
Yes.
This was a gift from one of my accounting teams. They bought me this. I am Captain Kirk.
That's fantastic.
Love it.
And to pay homage to the older ones, I do have Robot.
Danger.
From Lost in Space. Yes, I do. I have props in my office. I love my props. I also have a lot of really good single malt whiskey here from my days in Scotland.
Oh my gosh, dude, you and I need to hang out. Yeah.
When are we going to Ann Arbor?
Yeah, come on up to Ann Arbor.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's not a terribly long drive for me. So I may take you up on that.
Not terribly. I had to drive back from Cape Girardeau to Ann Arbor when 9/11 happened because ADP was in St. Louis and they were processing our payroll, and the payroll checks were stuck on the tarmac in a jet, and our team needed to get paid. And I was down there doing an ERP implementation, and it's like I had a car rental, so I didn't have to get one, but I ended up driving to St. Louis to ADP to pick up the checks and drove all the way back to Michigan so that our manufacturing team could get paid. So yes, I know about that drive from Missouri to Ann Arbor. It's not that short.
I lived in Cedar Rapids for a number of years, and it was very odd to find that I was a 4-hour drive from basically anywhere I needed to get to. 4 hours to Kansas City, St. Louis, Chicago, South Dakota. I mean, it was just everywhere. Everybody was like, so I'm here. How long will it take you? I don't know, probably 4 hours. So
it's 4 hours to everywhere. Yeah.
This is getting entirely too Midwestern, and I can feel that college football or college basketball is about to come up. So I'm going to cut it off before we get there. It's getting a little bit too Midwesty. We're coming into the end of our time. Anthony, I got to ask you, what is the one thing that we should have asked you that we didn't, or what is the wisdom that you have to give that we didn't tease out of you?
I think we covered it. I can't really think of anything. I mean, like I said, I can go on for hours on this topic, but in the end, it all comes down to cash flow, baby. Cash flow, cash flow. It's a hugely important thing. And knowing where you've been to know where you're going. You know, if you take nothing else away from this podcast, take that one. The finance function is not it's a nice to have. No, it's an absolute essential if you're going to scale and be really successful.
I can't imagine we could wrap it up any better than that. That was perfect.
Love it. Well, we've been talking to Anthony Nitsos, founder and lead guru at SaaS Gurus. Anthony, thank you so much for your time. How is best for people to reach you?
Well, the nice thing is the last name Nitsos, Nitsos, is one of the rarest on the planet. So if you Google my name, you're going to find me. Not the kid in Melbourne, Australia, by the way. It's me. I think there are only 2 Anthony Nitsos in the entire planet. SaaSGurus.io, SaaSGurus, just like it sounds.io. That's our website. There's a contact me page there. I'm on LinkedIn, Anthony Nitsos, easy enough to find. Send me an email or through the contact. It's anthony@SaaS-Gurus.com. I have a different URL for my email so that the bots out there can't figure out my email from my website, right? So yep, I pride myself on getting back to people same day, if not within 5 minutes of getting an email. So you send me an email and say, hey, I'm interested in talking to you. I will respond to you.
Fantastic.
And now all the Star Wars fans in our audience have a place to direct their hate mail. So
stop it. I have filters. I have an AI filter that'll take all that crud and just kind of put it in the trash where it belongs.
Oh,
Luke
no.
Skywalker, I don't think so.
Oh, no.
Live long and prosper, baby.
Justin, my friend, thank you so much as always. And a special thanks to our listeners. If you like what you're hearing, have ideas for the show, or just want to tell us what's on your mind, hit that like button, subscribe if you are so inclined. And we've got several different ways that you can reach out to us, and we'll reach back out to you. Thanks again, and we'll see you all next time on SaaS That App.
Cheers.
Thanks for cruising along with us on SaaS That App. We hope you grabbed some insights that were inspiring, actionable, or at least entertaining.
If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
Until next time, keep building, keep growing, and keep those apps sassy.